Even though Ottawa recently announced that Pfizer will be sending 20 million more doses of the vaccine our way, vaccine supply is a bit of an issue right now. To talk more about it in detail is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun, joining me once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, millions more doses are on the way, but many Canadians are asking, when will we have access to them?
Well, it won't be right away. Look, this is good news. I'm not going to deny that the Prime Minister's announcement Tuesday morning outside of Rideau Cottage is not a good thing. Absolutely, it is. But at the beginning, when he first announced it, he didn't say when the doses would be coming. He had to be prompted, he had to be pushed a little bit on that. And the reason that's important is maybe you heard that the government actually turned down an additional 16 million doses of the Moderna vaccine. And the reason is it was going to come late in 2021. So we're talking sometime between October and December. Well, at that point, the government is hoping that everyone who wants a vaccine will get one. So adding 16 million doses at the end didn't make any sense. They made the right decision. So when he announced these 20 million doses, didn't give a date, it becomes, well, okay, are they coming next month? Are they coming in 2 months? Are they coming in 9 months? We need to know the details. The Prime Minister said in April or May. So I'm going to assume May and hope for April. And that's the way we have to deal with an awful lot of these things. So it's not going to speed up the process of inoculating frontline healthcare workers and people in nursing homes and the most vulnerable that we're all looking to do right across the country in the first quarter. We're still only expecting a total of 6 million doses of both Moderna and Pfizer between now and the end of March 31st, but it is a good increase that will come early in the second quarter. So kudos to the government for that.
Now let's discuss the current situation when it comes to vaccine rollout, Brian. Here in Alberta, Premier Jason Kenney says, without a big delivery, our province will be short about 20,000 doses next week. Now, where you are in Ontario, there are hospitals in both Ottawa and Toronto that had to stop vaccinating, but the feds say, hey, there are no issues here. Who should we believe?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the hospitals, or the hospital closest to Parliament Hill, the Ottawa Civic Campus, it is shut down for its vaccination clinic. It does not have any more doses, and that's a bad thing. Here in Toronto, steps from me, the University Health Network is out of doses. They're just some of the places that are out. And as you mentioned, Jason Kenney says 20,000 short in Alberta next week. Saskatchewan says they're going to be short. Brian Pallister in Manitoba says, yep, we have the ability to administer more doses than the federal government can deliver. And last week we talked about this. The Prime Minister said he's frustrated by vaccines sitting in freezers instead of going into arms. And he was absolutely right. But since then, the provinces have ramped up. They were having some hiccups in the first couple of weeks of delivery. I think because they were all expecting the vaccines to be coming in at December 31st. They showed up on December 13th, and some of the provinces were injecting people on the 14th. I think a little bit later, depending on where you are. But that, you know, that was a bit of a surprise, you know, more than 2 weeks early. So they had to adjust, they had to ramp up quicker. Well, now they're at the point where they can administer more doses than the federal government can deliver at this point. It's going to be bumpy, and that's why I was hopeful when the Prime Minister said an additional 20 million doses that of the Pfizer vaccine, that it might be in the first quarter, because that would make a world of difference. Hal, the sooner that we can inoculate, I know everyone's worried about frontline healthcare workers and paramedics, and that's just become a priority group in Alberta. I get that. But to me, if we want to get society back to normal, the people we have to inoculate first are people over the age of 80 and then move down to the age of 70, because those are the people who are most likely to have severe negative impacts, from hospitalizations to going on into the ICU, to going on a ventilator, or the one that none of us want, to die from COVID-19. Those are the people who are overwhelmingly at risk. We need to make sure that they're looked after. Then, as the rest of us start getting the vaccine, we can start relaxing these restrictions that we're living with, that, you know, it leads to this bizarre life that we've been in for the last 9-10 months.
You know, we just interviewed a retired microbiologist from Germany, an award-winning microbiologist, Dr. Suchart Bhakti, and he agreed with you as well. He said, those over the age of 70, most vulnerable, and they need the help more than ever. Now, you've advocated for approving AstraZeneca to Canada's vaccine supply chain. Is that something the Trudeau Liberals are really considering right now?
Well, Health Canada is evaluating it along with Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. Now, Johnson & Johnson seems to be a bit further on. Health officials late last week were saying, well, we're expecting new information at the end of January, beginning of February. That's information that will have to be evaluated. So if they're not getting it for another 2 to 3 weeks, it'll be some time before that vaccine is a possibility. The European Union is saying they may consider approving AstraZeneca by the end of January. And Health Canada is working in concert with the EU to look at what this rolling approval model. Normally you have to submit everything at once, Hal, and then they take a long time and they consider it. Right now, it's a rolling approval model. You get a bit of data, you send it in. You get another bit of data, you send it in. They evaluate it as you go. So there is the possibility that Health Canada could approve this vaccine within a couple of weeks. My view is if they're going to approve it before the EU and the US, because then we can scoop up doses before they get into the market and get ahead of ourselves. Couple of problems with this. Questions about the efficacy of AstraZeneca. The company has claimed as high as 90% efficacy, which is a bit below Pfizer and Moderna. But then others in trying to replicate are saying, no, it's closer to 62 to 72. So there are some questions around that. That might be part of the delay. There are reasons at times that health officials do delay on these things. If you remember back to the spring, there was the rapid test from an Ottawa-based company called Spartan Bio. Everyone was hopeful for it. It got approved, and then it failed in the field. We don't want a repeat of that.
Now, another big question, of course, as well, Brian, if Ottawa does get the AstraZeneca vaccine, can the provinces get enough shots into the arms? And do they have the capacity, especially in the rural regions of the country?
Well, anywhere that you're into rural regions, remote areas of the country, it becomes more difficult, no doubt, especially if you're dealing with Pfizer's vaccine. It's why the territories have only received the Moderna vaccine. But, in a city like Lethbridge, there's no problem having the the Pfizer vaccine. And we're even learning how to transport it. If you remember early on, we were told you can't move it. Well, now they're figuring out how to do it. AstraZeneca is not as difficult to move around. So that would be a bonus. Even if it's not quite as, doesn't give as much protection, it would give enough that most people would be, protected from the virus from this drug. So, will the provinces be able to administer the doses? Everyone I'm talking to is saying yes. Absolutely, there were hiccups along the way, but they've built capacity. To give you an idea, I was talking with retired General Rick Hillier, who is leading Ontario's distribution task force, and I said, General, we're at 15,000 doses a day now. How do we get to 150,000 doses a day? That's where we need to be to vaccinate the population of Ontario, which is 14.7 million people. And he said, Brian, we're going to go from vaccination clinics in places like hospitals to making sure you can get this in your doctor's office or in your pharmacy, or mass vaccination clinics in community centers. He even described saying, you know what, maybe we take a school district and we shut down school for a day, and think of how many days have been lost for schooling due to COVID-19, but you shut it down for one day, the school buses come in, they bring in all the teachers, all the principals, all the kids, they all get vaccinated that day. He says that would be a way to move things along. We've seen vaccination clinics set up in not only in hospitals now, but in hockey rinks. We're going to see more of that going on across the country. I think the provinces, after a bumpy start, will be able to deliver once they get the supply.
A recent poll by Angus Reid says more and more people are on board. They're interested in receiving the vaccine, but not here in Alberta. Brian, a lot of the friends that I've spoken to who are not going to be getting the vaccine, they're taking a wait-and-see approach. They want to see if there are any long-term detrimental effects before they move ahead.
And that was common across the entire country. And to give you an example, so Alberta right now is at 47% say, yeah, I'll take the vaccine right now. And then there's a bunch of people saying, well, I'll wait and see. And then a smaller group that says, no, I'm never taking it. A couple of months ago, Alberta and Ontario were tied in terms of the number of people that would say, well, actually, I believe Ontario was just a point or two lower than Alberta, but they were both below 50% and saying, yeah, I'll take the vaccine as soon as I can get it. Well, because people weren't sure. Now we've had several weeks of the vaccine. Alberta hasn't moved, but Ontario's gone up 21 points in terms of people saying, I'll take it. As soon as you let me know, I'll take it. There are going to be some people, Hal, who will never take the vaccine, who think that this is new technology, we can't trust it, these have been rushed. Um, I've been looking at the papers, I've been looking at the science. I'm not worried at this point, and I can be skeptical of these things. When people tell me, oh, we have to always trust the experts, I remind them of things like thalidomide. I'm not going to jump at something without giving careful consideration. But having looked at the process that these vaccines have gone through, I'm comfortable. It's better than the alternative of you or a loved one getting sick from COVID-19. If you're over the age of 70, which my parents are, well, you're facing a far higher chance of a fatality than someone my age. I do want to be able to see my parents. And I think that's the view of an awful lot of Canadians.
I had some friends as well tell me recently why they weren't getting the vaccine. I said, well, why is that? They said, well, you never buy the first year make and model of a car that comes out. You want the manufacturer to kind of work out the bugs a little bit, 2 or 3 years down the road, and then I'll possibly think about buying that car. I thought that was an interesting analogy, when it comes to a vehicle.
There's a lot of Canadians in that camp. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, Brian, new lockdown measures have been imposed starting with a curfew in Quebec, and now more measures for both Ontario and Saskatchewan. What are some of the highlights we need to know?
Well, curfew in Quebec is the biggest one. I mean, between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m., you're not allowed outside of your house unless it's for essential reasons, like going to work. You can be stopped and asked where you're going. You can face incredible fines. Some people have tried to get around this. There's a woman in Sherbrooke, Quebec, who was walking her husband. She had her husband on a dog leash. The police were having none of that. They said, you're yanking our chain. And they're facing, I believe it's $1,500 fines apiece for that little stunt. In Ontario, we dodged a curfew, but we may have something worse. We're facing a stay-at-home order. And, this will come into effect midnight from Wednesday into Thursday. So, we'll have to wait and see how the enforcement goes, because there's talk of, well, police have wide latitude. Look, I've been around the law long enough. I know that police have latitude. They have discretion on enforcing any law. Think about getting pulled over for a traffic ticket, and the police officer says, well, Hal, look, I understand why you were speeding. We'll let you off with a warning this time. That's officer discretion. But I think a lot of people are nervous about, okay, it's 2 in the afternoon and I'm walking down the street. Do I have a reason to walk down the street? Are the police going to stop me? There's a lot of people nervous about that. We've had some other changes into retail hours. Even our liquor stores are going to be closing at 8 p.m. So the government's going to take a haircut there. The wine shop down the street for me has to close 3 hours early. There's a lot of changes that are coming to Ontario. Saskatchewan extending their rules for another 2 weeks. They were supposed to run out, I believe, this coming weekend, and they're going now until the end of January. So, it's the same issue across the country. Case counts are too high, hospitalizations are too high, and intensive care unit admissions are too high. For people that think that this is just about case counts and daily case counts, and I hear that every day, Hal, they say, well, this is just a case-demic and nothing's happening. Well, I can tell you here in Ontario that we're looking at more than half of our ICU beds being taken up by COVID-19 patients within a couple of weeks. And if that happens, well, what about people who have a heart attack? They have kidney failure. They're in a car accident. They need intensive care unit beds as well where they live. If more than 1,000 of the 2,000 available are taken up by COVID-19 patients who are among the most intensive in terms of the care they need, that takes away beds from other people. So this is about more than case counts across much of the country at this point.
Brian, we only have about a minute left here in our interview, but tell me something. I've heard rumors that we may be seeing an election possibly in the spring or the fall. What are you hearing?
Well, there was a lot of talk about that, especially with the cabinet shuffle. Navdeep Bains leaving cabinet, Omar Al-Gabra being brought in. Was Justin Trudeau telling his ministers, hey, you've got to be in line because we're ready for a spring election? We do know that the Prime Minister did tell the Liberal Party executive, be ready for a campaign this spring. I think that he wanted one in the fall, didn't get it. He wants one at a time when perhaps the vaccines, let's say 20 million extra doses, are showing up, and he can take credit for that. Don't underestimate the idea that politicians will use the pandemic for their own re-election chances. We've already seen it in British Columbia and in New Brunswick, where they didn't have to go to an election. I'd say the same thing about Scott Moe, but he'd already delayed an election that was overdue because of the pandemic, and they really didn't have a choice anymore.
And the Prime Minister definitely wants a majority government, so remains to see what will happen. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.